Welcome, deep divers. Have you ever had that moment? You open up a spreadsheet or maybe glance at those quarterly KPI reports, and you see the red and green arrows telling you some kind of story. Maybe you feel that familiar pang of anxiety, or perhaps just a fleeting sense of relief. It's pretty much unavoidable, isn't it? We're constantly swimming in numbers, performance indicators, targets. They touch almost every part of our lives. But here's a crucial question for you to consider today. Have we truly stopped to ask if these numbers, these meticulously tracked metrics, genuinely reflect the real world? Or are they maybe just a reflection of someone else's, perhaps even arbitrary, evaluation system? This deep dive is going to challenge that very notion head-on. We're rolling from some truly powerful insights, especially those found in the really illuminating book, Bad Data. And this book makes a compelling, maybe even unsettling argument. It suggests that many of the most persistent and frankly vexing problems in our modern world aren't actually due to a lack of data. No, instead they stem from our collective, often unquestioning, blind faith in data that is, well, flawed or misleading.
And that's precisely our mission today, right? We want to go beyond just pointing out the problem. Our goal is to help you understand why this blind faith takes hold, and maybe more importantly, how we can begin to see past that deceptive veil that some of these incorrect metrics can cast. So yeah, this deep dive is designed to be your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed, helping you navigate the complex, number-driven world we all live in. We'll arm you with surprising facts and hopefully just enough humor to keep you hooked.
Okay, so how are we going to peel back these layers? Well, we're going to embark on a journey through 5 key thinking models. These powerfully illustrate exactly how data can lead us astray. And each model is brought to life with compelling, sometimes pretty shocking, real-world case studies. Our ultimate goal here is to arm you with the insights necessary to not just understand, but critically evaluate the numbers that govern so much of your professional and, even your personal life. Let's really dig into this. Kicking things off, let's explore a really pervasive problem we call the measurement fallacy. Now, this is a deeply counterintuitive idea. We often automatically assume that whatever is easily measurable must, by definition, be important. Yet what we're discovering again and again is that the most truly important things are often the ones that are the most incredibly difficult to actually put a number on.
It's a subtle trap, isn't it? I mean, think about your own experiences. A student's high grade on a test, it doesn't automatically mean they've deeply learned the material. Or a perfect customer satisfaction score on some survey doesn't always translate to genuine, lasting customer satisfaction or loyalty. Not really. And a single standardized test result, well, it rarely, if ever, captures the full breadth of a person's actual ability or creative potential. The numbers, they give us a snapshot, sure, but rarely the whole nuanced picture.
Right. And to really drive this point home, the book introduces a fascinating and frankly a bit unsettling analogy, the ant death spiral. Sometimes called an ant mill. Now, ants are incredibly efficient creatures. They communicate through this intricate web of chemical signals, pheromones to find food, identify enemies, maintain their colony. It's a highly sophisticated system. But occasionally, if a lead ant unintentionally doubles back on its own trail, it can create this continuous reinforcing loop. The ants just keep following that signal, marching for hours in a giant circle, laying down more pheromones, making the trail stronger and stronger. But here's the thing, this isn't a journey to a food source or a new nest. It just continues in a literal loop until every single ant dies of exhaustion. It's really a tragic consequence of an otherwise brilliant adaptation when the signal becomes the entire purpose.
And this is where it gets really interesting for us humans. Like those ants, we interpret our world through signals, our metrics, our KPIs. We measure almost everything. Work performance, healthcare quality, education, the strength of our economy, the congestion of our roads, business profits, revenue, growth. I mean, we convert almost every action into a statistic. We create spreadsheets and dashboards for literally everything. It's everywhere. But, and this is the crucial difference, unlike those ants, we humans have the unique capacity to choose which metrics we follow and even whether we should be following any at all. We can, to use the book's powerful phrase, look up from the path and reassess where we're going. It's actually a profound responsibility when you think about it.
Okay, so let's connect this directly to a real-world case study, one that tragically embodies this measurement fallacy, the widespread impact of the U.S. No Child Left Behind policy on education. Specifically, how it kind of culminated in the devastating Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal. Under this policy, high-stakes standardized tests like the SATs, GREs, and the Criterion Reference Competency Tests, or CRCTs in Georgia, they became the sole focus of education. Think about the pressure. Thousands of dollars in grant money for schools, the very reputation of an institution, the careers of teachers and principals all hinged on these test scores. The stakes were just incredibly high.
And this singular, almost obsessive focus quickly revealed the profound flaws in standardized test design itself. I mean, these tests, heavily reliant on multiple choice formats and strict time limits, they're notoriously poor at measuring true understanding, critical thinking, or genuine creativity. They often simplify incredibly complex subjects into simplistic, single correct answers. For instance, a 12th grade social studies question on how beliefs and values are expressed in the world, a topic political philosophers could debate for decades, is reduced to a single, easily memorized answer: ideology. Simplistic. These tests even include questions of, well, no discernible usefulness, like obscure chemical symbol, simply because they're easy to mark.
It sounds like they're designed more for efficient grading than for true assessment of learning, doesn't it?
Exactly. And what's even more concerning is that studies show these tests can be inherently biased. For example, women often perform worse on multiple choice questions compared to free response formats. Ultimately, the uncomfortable truth is that these tests aren't primarily designed to authentically evaluate knowledge. They're designed to sort and rank students for admissions. They're just a cost-effective selection method for large institutions. That's really what they are.
And the real-world consequences of this singular focus became truly chilling, didn't they? Teachers, under immense pressure, they stopped fostering deep understanding. Instead, they shifted to teaching to the test, cramming facts, rote memorization, and even teaching students tricks like guessing answers or reading the answers before the questions. It completely replaced the wonder and curiosity of genuine learning with just stress and, frankly, inanity.
It got worse. Beyond just altering teaching methods, schools also started manipulating their class composition. Students deemed likely to perform poorly were strategically removed from classrooms, sometimes classified with learning disabilities, or even excluded from tests entirely, all to artificially inflate average scores. It became this perverse system where the numbers mattered more than the actual students' well-being or their education.
Which brings us to the extreme and truly devastating example: the Atlanta Public Schools cheating scandal under Superintendent Beverly Hall. The pressure there was just relentless. Schools were required to show a 3% increase in students meeting standards every single year. Now, that's a target that becomes incredibly difficult to hit year after year, especially when you're already starting from a relatively high baseline.
Right. And the incentive structure was clear and frankly brutal. Principals and staff, even bus drivers, could receive up to $2,000 in cash bonuses for meeting targets. Conversely, principals who failed to meet these targets within 3 years were summarily fired, a staggering 90% replacement rate during Hall's tenure. This fostered a pervasive culture of fear, intimidation, and retaliation. It was a climate where survival basically depended on the numbers, no matter what it took.
So what was the devastating outcome of all this intense pressure?
It was widespread, systemic cheating. Teachers and principals were directly changing answers on tests, students were coached during exams, whistleblowers were punished or transferred. It was estimated that cheating occurred in an astonishing 83% of Atlanta public schools. It wasn't just a few bad actors. The investigation ultimately implicated 178 teachers and principals, with 82 confessing. Many were charged under the RICO statute, which is typically used for organized crime. This wasn't just isolated bad apples. It was a deep systemic breakdown where the entire system twisted itself to serve the metric.
Wow. It sounds like the system completely twisted itself. Is there like a broader principle at play that explains how this kind of thing happens?
Absolutely. This illustrates a critical pattern that the book calls path-dependent proxy indicator alienation. That's a mouthful, but basically the authentic goal, G fostering genuine learning, was completely overshadowed and replaced by a proxy metric, M standardized test scores. Management became fixated on optimizing M, leading to M appearing to improve dramatically, while G, true education, was tragically sacrificed. It's a classic trap where the tool, the metric, takes over and the entire system ends up serving the number, completely losing sight of its original purpose. A profound disconnect.
That leads us right into our next big idea, the reverse optimization trap, often captured by the famous Goodhart's law, which states, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. It's an unsettling truth about human behavior and incentives, almost like a universal law of unintended consequences.
Precisely. It means that once a quantitative indicator is used as a basis for evaluation and incentives, people will inevitably find ways to achieve that specific number, even if their actions diverge from the original objective or lead to completely counterproductive results. The metric essentially gets gamed, right? And what was once a useful signal becomes distorted or even totally useless.
Yeah, and we see this play out in so many unexpected places. Take, for instance, that curious historical anecdote from 19th century China. Paleontologists, interested in collecting dinosaur bones, offered to pay local peasants for each fragment they turned in. Sounds simple enough, right?
Well, the result was an immediate perverse incentive. The peasants quickly learned to game the system. How? By smashing the dinosaur bones they found into more pieces. Why? To increase their yield of fragments and, consequently, their payment. So the original underlying goal of collecting complete, valuable fossils for scientific study was completely undermined by the payment structure itself. A classic incentive gone wrong.
Or consider the Sears auto repair scandal back in 1992. Mechanics were paid commissions for the repairs they undertook. What happened then?
The outcome, depressingly predictable, was that mechanics started performing unnecessary repairs just to boost their commissions. They prioritized personal gain over genuine customer service or the company's integrity. Goodhart's law in action, plain and simple.
We even see it in healthcare settings, like in the UK emergency departments, which began measuring the time it took for patients to see a doctor upon arrival. Surely that's a good thing, right? Reducing wait times.
On the surface, yes, absolutely. But to improve the reported times, admissions staff began to refuse to allow ambulances to unload patients until doctors were actually ready. This tied up vital paramedic resources, increasing emergency response times elsewhere in the system, all to manipulate a single metric. It created this huge bottleneck. And remember in the 1990s, when New York and Pennsylvania started publishing hospital and surgeon mortality data, surgeons started turning away patients with complex, high-risk problems to improve their reported success rates, leaving the most vulnerable patients without care. They optimized for their numbers, not for patient need.
And this is where it gets really interesting and, again, quite disturbing. The NYPD's CompStat system, introduced by William Bratton, the goal was laudable. Reduce crime in New York City by holding precinct commanders intensely accountable for crime rates. It was heralded as a revolution in policing.
Initially, CompStat tracked serious index crimes, murder, rape, burglary, and later expanded to quality of life enforcement, so minor infractions like graffiti and fare evasion. Commanders were given independence but faced relentless pressure for results, for constant improvement. The perverse effects, however, were widespread. Officers faced pressure to meet arrest and summons quotas. They began downgrading felonies to misdemeanors, for example. A rape might be categorized as a lower crime to make the stats look better. They wrote fake reports for stop and frisks, known as Ghost 250s, and even pressured victims not to file complaints or to alter their accounts.
And that truly chilling example is the Adrien Schoolcraft case. He was an NYPD officer who started secretly documenting superiors forcing quota fulfillment and crime downgrading. When his actions were discovered, he was forcibly committed to a psychiatric ward. It's incredible. His tapes provided smoking gun evidence that the NYPD was using quotas with little regard for legal, reasonable suspicion, and a judge later found the system had been perverted into a tool of discrimination. It's just a stark reminder of the human cost when numbers become the sole focus.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's clear the system had inverted incentives. The desire for continued crime reduction, even when actual crime was already low, led commanders to get creative. The metric became an end in itself, rather than a means to a safer city. And perhaps the most devastating example of Goodhart's law comes from the Vietnam War. The U.S. military adopted a strategy of attrition, aiming to kill more Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers than they could replace, reaching this supposed crossover point.
And their primary measure of success was the infamous body counts.
Exactly. Despite the inherent difficulties in obtaining accurate numbers in a fluid, unconventional conflict, these counts were heavily relied upon by command. The devastating impact was that reported body counts instilled a false sense of progress, leading military leaders to believe the war was going well when it fundamentally was not. It shifted the focus from understanding the political and social complexities of the conflict to a purely quantitative measure of destruction. The system was wearing down the Vietnamese, yes, but the enemy was willing to absorb staggering losses, far exceeding what the U.S. leadership considered sustainable or even comprehensible.
So it sounds like this pattern shows us how an attempt to measure progress can completely backfire, creating an incentive system that works against the very thing it was supposed to achieve.
Precisely. In all these cases, from dinosaur bone fragments to military body counts, the real underlying goal was replaced by a proxy variable. This led to an inverted incentive structure where the pursuit of the metric actively worked against the original objective, ultimately leading to the system self-destructing or failing in its true purpose. People optimized for the number, not the actual objective. It happens over and over.
Okay, that leads us to our third powerful concept, quantification bias. This is our deeply ingrained tendency to believe that simply because we have a collection of numbers or data, we automatically possess the truth. This bias often leads us to completely ignore critical flaws in how data is collected, the underlying assumptions built into algorithms, or, the inherent limitations of statistical inference.
Yeah, and this raises an important set of questions for you, the listener, to always ask when confronted with data. Ask, who collected this data, and what were their intentions? Were there any crucial variables or contexts that were deliberately or even accidentally left out? And if an algorithm is involved, does it contain any hidden, possibly discriminatory logic? We have to look beyond the slick charts and the seemingly precise numbers.
Let's illuminate some of these data blind spots with some surprising case studies. First, let's talk about millennial car ownership. You might have seen headlines confidently stating that millennials are defying predictions and buying more cars than Generation X, citing raw purchase numbers. Sounds pretty definitive, right?
And that seems straightforward, doesn't it? Until you dig into the PER. The initial comparison used raw numbers of cars purchased, but here's the bias. The millennial generation, as defined in those studies, spans 17 years, whereas Gen X was only 11 years. So the millennial group is simply much larger. When you properly compare per capita, that is, cars purchased per 1,000 people in each generation, Gen Xers actually bought significantly more cars. This is the problem of the critical importance of always asking per what when presented with a numerical comparison. It's a crucial oversight that completely flips the narrative.
Fascinating how that little word per can just change everything. Okay, next, let's consider urban traffic congestion. You hear reports about cities like Vancouver having the worst congestion, even when they've actively worked to reduce average commuting times for their citizens through things like downtown growth and transit investment. How can both be true?
Right, it seems contradictory. This is where a flawed metric, the Time Travel Index, or TTI, comes into play. It calculates congestion as a ratio of time spent commuting in rush hour versus time spent commuting in free-flow traffic. The core problem is that TTI paradoxically improves if average commute distances increase.
Wait, it improves if commutes get longer?
Yes, because longer free-flow travel times inflate the denominator in the ratio, even if the total time spent commuting remains high or increases. It incentivizes longer trips at higher speeds, not actually reduce total commuting time. So a short, congested 2-mile drive might look worse under TTI than a long, fast 20-mile drive. It completely distorts our understanding of the true commuting burden. It's like measuring how fast you're running a marathon by only looking at the speed of your last mile, even if you spent hours crawling through the first 20.
Okay, that's wild. And what about pedestrian safety? Often you'll see statistics reported as pedestrian fatalities per 100,000 people in a city. Sounds like a reasonable way to compare safety, right?
Again, the PER is crucial here. That metric is flawed because it includes everyone in the population: drivers, people who stay at home, not just actual pedestrians. A much more accurate metric would be fatalities per million walk-to-work trips, or something similar that reflects actual walking activity. When you use this kind of metric, cities like New York and Vancouver are revealed to be much safer for actual pedestrians than the initial broader metric suggests. The truth depends entirely on how you define your denominator. If you're going to measure pedestrian safety, you really ought to measure it per pedestrian trip, right?
Absolutely. And electoral maps are another powerful visual example of this quantification bias, especially those showing state-by-state or county-by-county results in the U.S., often dominated by red and blue. They look so definitive, but they can be incredibly misleading.
What's fascinating here is how these maps visually overrepresent rural areas simply due to their vast land area. Meanwhile, densely populated urban areas, which often lean differently politically, are visually dwarfed because their voters are concentrated in small geographic spaces. A small county with just a few hundred people might take up disproportionately more map space than a large urban county with millions. So the map implicitly assumes area equates to political influence, creating a really misleading visual narrative about the political landscape. It's the visual equivalent of the PER problem we just discussed.
And finally, let's examine that argument about carbon emissions. Comparing Canada and Germany, but suggesting we measure by size of the country instead of per capita. What's the fundamental problem there?
Well, unpacking that logic reveals its absurdity pretty quickly. Measuring emissions per land area suggests bizarre improvement strategies. You could reduce emissions per person, which is good. Or you could reduce the number of people in a country, which is potentially problematic as a climate strategy in itself. Or, even more absurdly, you could increase the land area of a country either by creating new land or taking sparsely populated land from another country. Neither genuinely reduces global emissions, obviously. This metric completely ignores the actual sources and solutions for emissions, leading to counterproductive conclusions, like one person occupying half the world with slightly lower emissions per area could look better for the climate than billions of others. It's just fundamentally flawed logic.
So, expert, it really sounds like data isn't some neutral objective truth. It's always influenced by who collected it and why at a specific point in time, and often by systems of power. What does that mean for how we should view data generally?
What this really reveals is that data isn't neutral, right? It's always a record produced by a particular power system at a given moment. The fundamental issue isn't the data itself, which is just a collection of numbers, but rather why we believe it so much. It's our often unquestioning faith in these numbers, which can obscure critical variables, underlying assumptions, and the power structures that shape what gets measured and how. We really need to be critical consumers of data, not just passive recipients.
That brings us to our fourth powerful model, gaming the metrics. This is where, when people know how they're being evaluated, they inevitably shift their focus to playing the game of the rules, rather than concentrating on authentic underlying performance. It's almost a natural human instinct, isn't it?
It creates a predictable chain reaction, almost a logic unfolding, as the book calls it. When an external incentive system is tied to a specific metric, it quickly creates a self-serving or speculative motive within individuals or organizations. This, in turn, often leads directly to the manipulation of the metrics themselves. And ultimately, that manipulation renders the original signal the metric was supposed to provide entirely invalid. It's the ultimate good-hearting of the system, but focusing on the how people do it.
Let's look at some truly pervasive examples of this metric manipulation. First up, corporate earnings management. Executive compensation is often tightly linked to earnings per share, or EPS, supposedly to align their interests with shareholders. Seems like a smart way to motivate management, right?
On paper, maybe. But earnings aren't just hard cash. They're a mix of actual cash flows and assumptions about future income and expenses, known as accruals. Think depreciation, pension plans, stock options, warranties. Managers can manipulate these accruals reporting revenues earlier, deferring expenses, to make current earnings look better than they are. And this leads directly to the problem of short-termism, an intense focus on quarterly earnings that causes companies to cut crucial long-term investments like R&D and marketing, even when managers know their long-term value. Surveys show almost 80% of managers would cut R&D or advertising just to meet short-term targets. They prioritize the quarterly number over the company's future health.
When this gaming is pushed too far, you get real-world consequences like the Enron, WorldCom, Nortel, and eToys scandals, right? Where companies pushed accounting practices beyond acceptable limits, leading to massive crashes and fraud. It's a clear agency problem where executives act in self-interest at the expense of long-term shareholder value.
Then there's academic research and bibliometrics. We use metrics like the Journal Impact Factor, JIF, and the Ig Index to evaluate scientific research in academics. They're supposed to measure scholarly influence and quality, but they've also incentivized widespread manipulation and gaming within academia.
How so? What kind of gaming happens there?
Well, we've seen an avalanche of substandard incremental papers as researchers feeling pressure to increase their citation counts and publication numbers, just churn out vast quantities of marginal, dubious, or low-impact studies simply to boost their counts. This is fueled by the proliferation of numerous, often questionable journals existing solely to publish these papers and increase citation counts, sometimes for a hefty fee. Researchers also engage in what's called cream skimming. Like those surgeons avoiding high-risk patients, academics might gravitate towards safer, more easily publishable incremental research where results are almost guaranteed. They avoid the inherently risky, long-term, and often unpredictable nature of fundamental, groundbreaking research, precisely the kind of research that leads to Nobel Prizes and major paradigm shifts. If it's not virtually certain of success, it might not get funded.
And this creates a tremendous administrative burden too, doesn't it? All that focus on metrics and proposals.
Absolutely. Researchers spend exorbitant amounts of time writing elaborate grant proposals. For instance, one study found Australian scientists spent the equivalent of 550 working years just writing proposals in a single year, rather than doing actual research or teaching. It's an enormous diversion of intellectual energy and resources. The broader impact is really profound, an erosion of research quality, leading to a rise in article retractions due to misconduct. This ultimately damages the reputation of science and leads to a loss of public trust in research institutions. Universities, once considered bastions of public good, risk becoming more like profit centers, focused on commercial applications, not fundamental discovery. What this shows is that when people figure out how to play the system, they often will. The metric stops being a way to truly improve and just becomes a tool for getting the numbers you want on paper.
Okay, that brings us to our fifth and final thinking model, the unmeasured loss. This highlights a critical blind spot where organizations, governments, and even individuals often focus exclusively on easily quantifiable metrics and completely ignore crucial but difficult to measure variables. What we don't count, we tend to undervalue and ultimately lose.
Yeah, this raises an important question. What truly gets lost when we only count the easy stuff? Initial examples abound. Companies might obsess over growth rates but completely miss the subtle yet vital emotional value a customer derives from their product or service. How do you measure that? Governments might proudly cite GDP figures but overlook the invaluable yet intangible measure of community cohesion or the true well-being of their citizens. It's what the economist Kenneth Boulding called the great fact that what can be easily measured gets measured, and what can't be easily measured tends to be ignored. It's a powerful observation.
Let's delve into some detailed case studies where what's not measured gets lost. Starting with healthcare, moving from inputs and outputs to actual outcomes. Traditionally, we have the fee-for-service model, where doctors are paid for each visit, test, or procedure. This inherently incentivizes more activity, right? More stuff done.
Exactly, but then you have innovative models like Crowfoot Village Family Practice, CVFP in Canada, which adopted a capitation model. Here, the clinic receives a flat fee per patient per year, regardless of how many times the patient visits. Now, this fundamentally shifted their focus from merely counting what is done, outputs like the number of patients seen or tests ordered, to what is accomplished, the ultimate outcome of genuine patient health and system efficiency. And the results were striking. A 28% drop in family doctor visits. Now, this didn't mean patients receive less care. It meant CVFP found more efficient ways to deliver it, like nurses handling routine calls. Doctors could then focus their expertise on more complex cases. The crucial missing piece in the fee-for-service model was the patient's actual health outcome and the overall efficiency of care delivery. The old model rewarded inefficiency, CVFP rewarded health.
That's a huge shift. And this extends to the workplace and the profound impact of trust and intrinsic motivation. Consider Best Buy's Results-Only Work Environment, or ROWE, a program that radically eliminated the concept of time worked as a metric. This feels almost revolutionary in many corporate settings.
It was. Best Buy surveyed employees asking how to improve the work environment, and the overwhelming response was essentially, "Trust me with my time." RO eliminated what they called sludge, the gossip, judgment, and criticism based purely on physical presence or hours clocked. Managers focused solely on measurable outcomes and clear expectations, not on clocking in or out. And what happened? Productivity increased, and employees reported feeling significantly more trusted and valued. The crucial missing metric in traditional workplaces. Trust and intrinsic motivation, things you can't easily put in a spreadsheet.
This leads us into the fascinating science of motivation. Experiments have shown that introducing extrinsic motivation, like money, can actually, surprisingly, undermine intrinsic motivation. How does that work?
The Soma puzzle experiment is a classic illustration. Students who were paid to solve puzzles actually lost interest in playing with them for fun when the payment was removed. Compare them to the students who were never paid, they kept playing. The external reward somehow tainted the intrinsic enjoyment of the activity itself. And in a study at a laundry plant, employees who initially had excellent attendance and overall productivity saw their attendance and other performance metrics decline once a specific monetary attendance bonus was implemented. The critical insight here is that intrinsic and extrinsic motivations don't simply add up. One can crowd out the other. When you reward only easily observable behavior, organizations risk neglecting crucial, unobservable, but vital aspects like cooperation, quality focus, loyalty, creativity, all the good stuff that relies on trust. This also ties into the social versus market norms concept from behavioral economics. Offering a friend $5 for shoveling snow can sour the social relationship, right? It shifts it to an inadequate market transaction. Similarly, formalizing work relationships with purely transactional metrics can destroy social goodwill and that invaluable discretionary effort people put in when they feel valued. You can't put a price on genuine connection or loyalty.
Okay, switching gears to urban planning. We see incomplete metrics at play with housing and transportation costs. Mortgage lending typically only considers housing costs when assessing affordability. What's the hidden problem there?
This is a classic incomplete metric because it misses the significant second-largest household expenditure, transportation costs. By neglecting this, banks inadvertently incentivize home buyers to move farther away from city centers where housing prices might be lower, but this often increases their overall cost of living due to higher commuting expenses. It's sometimes called the drive-till-you-qualify phenomenon. The metric failed to capture the holistic picture of true household affordability. You see something similar in call centers, measuring employees solely on average handling time. This incentivizes quick calls, maybe even hanging up on customers, but ignores the vital unmeasured impact on customer satisfaction and long-term loyalty.
Right, optimizing one thing while damaging another. And environmentally, the concept of food miles, the distance food travels, is a popular sustainability metric. It seems intuitive that less travel equals less carbon.
Right. It seems intuitive, but it's actually a misleading metric in many cases. Transportation accounts for only about 4% of food-related emissions. The vast bulk, around 83%, comes from the production stage. So, counterintuitively, eating local food grown in energy-intensive greenhouses can have a higher carbon footprint than food shipped halfway across the world but grown efficiently in its natural climate. Think Kenyan roses versus Dutch roses grown in heated greenhouses. The food miles metric blinds us to the larger, more impactful part of the picture. The missing, more comprehensive metric is a life cycle assessment, or LCA. This rigorously evaluates all inputs and outputs, raw materials, energy for production, packaging, transport, disposal throughout a product's entire life. Early LCAs, like Coca-Cola's for plastic bottles decades ago, demonstrated that often the seemingly obvious environmental villain isn't the real problem.
And finally, let's look at macroeconomics and the most widely used and influential measure of economic productivity globally.
GDP.
What does it miss? It feels like the ultimate metric for a country.
Well, Robert F. Kennedy famously critiqued GDP way back, saying it measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And he had a point. GDP counts vastly different qualities equally. Spending on guns and alarm systems because of insecurity is weighed the same as spending on books or trips to the zoo for enrichment. It doesn't differentiate between good and bad economic activity. It also completely ignores environmental degradation. In fact, cleaning up pollution adds to GDP. It ignores human health sickness leading to healthcare costs, adds to GDP. And it ignores all non-monetized activities like volunteering, childcare, or community building. So, according to GDP, a country where people work themselves to death, spend heavily on security, and clean up pollution is technically better off than a country where people spend less money but spend their time reading, enjoying nature, or connecting with loved ones. It was never designed to measure happiness or true well-being, but we act like it does.
So it sounds like every system built purely on numbers has these inherent, sometimes massive, invisible gaps. How do we even begin to overcome these blind spots?
Precisely. All quantitative systems inherently possess blind spots because they focus narrowly on what's easily measurable, consequently neglecting vital, often intangible variables. Truly valuable system reform, therefore, must directly confront and address these unmeasured aspects, things like trust, dignity, and meaning. These are the invisible forces that truly drive human and organizational flourishing, and they are notoriously hard to quantify, but ignoring them is perilous.
We've taken a really deep dive today into how metrics have been misused, abused, and misunderstood across pretty much every sector imaginable: education, healthcare, business, government, even our personal lives. We've seen how they can obscure reality, disrupt progress, and distort the very systems they aim to improve. But it's also vital to acknowledge the immense power inherent in metrics themselves. And that power is ultimately about choice. We get to choose what we measure and, crucially, how much power we allow those measurements to exert over us.
Yeah, and this leads us to directly challenge one of the most ingrained maxims in modern management. Peter Drucker's famous quote, "If you can't measure it, you can't manage it." Our deep dive today strongly suggests that this idea needs to be rigorously rethought, maybe even turned on its head sometimes. We've seen how by trying to make the important parts of our lives countable, we risk losing what really counts. In many situations, by attempting to measure something, we may paradoxically render it unmanageable. The danger isn't just data manipulation like Goodhart's law, it's how metrics fundamentally change our focus away from what truly matters.
But there are counterexamples, right? Shining lights that show us a better way. Let's look at Khan Academy and Salman Khan's really revolutionary approach to education. Here, tests are described as gateways, not yardsticks.
Exactly. Khan Academy's tests are fundamentally different from the standardized ones we discussed earlier. They are not timed, they can be taken repeatedly, and they demand mastery. For instance, you might need to get 10 questions correct in a row on a specific concept before the system lets you move on. This directly addresses the Swiss cheese learning problem of conventional education, where students are often rushed through curriculum, leaving these little gaps in their understanding that create a shaky foundation later on. Khan Academy allows students to struggle with a concept, to practice until they truly understand it, leading to profound breakthroughs and often accelerated learning once mastery is achieved. So the core lesson here is transformative. For Khan Academy, tests are not yardsticks of ability designed to sort and rank students. Instead, they are gateways to new learning. Their purpose is purely feedback, to indicate whether a student understands a concept and if they need more time or work. This demonstrates how rethinking metrics can align them perfectly with the authentic goal of fostering deep learning and mastery for all.
So we're left with this overarching, maybe provocative question for personal reflection. Why do we, as individuals and as a society, feel this compulsive need to measure absolutely everything?
Well, looking at it from a historical perspective, modern governance systems, whether we're talking nations, corporations, or educational institutions, they originated from a tradition of rationalized control. Measurement systems, at their core, are a form of power technology. Those who establish the standards and define the metrics effectively control the allocation of resources and shape behavior. They define what counts, literally. And then from a structural perspective, within these systems, a self-reinforcing evaluation-reward resource allocation reevaluation feedback loop forms. Once this loop becomes distorted by flawed metrics, as we've seen in so many examples, it can become incredibly difficult to reverse, leading to pervasive dysfunction. It's a powerful, often self-perpetuating cycle. So what can you, the listener, do about it in your own life or work? We encourage you to ask 3 critical questions of any metric you encounter. First, who set the specific metric and what were their intentions or interests? Really dig into the source and the motive. Second, what is the real underlying goal that this metric is actually supposed to represent? Don't confuse the number with the actual objective. And third, are there more important things, often unquantifiable, that are not being measured or considered here? Look for the invisible, the uncounted, and try to distinguish between metrics used for rigid control versus those used as flexible feedback. Prioritize adaptability, growth, and genuine understanding over narrow stability and control. And maybe most importantly, remember to avoid mistaking precision for certainty, data for understanding, or the absence of measurement for the absence of importance. Just because you can't count it doesn't mean it doesn't count.
The ultimate power really lies in your choice. You can choose to be measured solely by how much money you make, how productive you appear, or how quickly you achieve some target. Or you can choose to measure your life by what you contribute to others, the quality of your relationships, your personal growth, or the impact you have on the world around you. Remember, the metric is never the ultimate goal. The goal is always something else. A healthier populace, better educated students, truly efficient systems, a higher quality of life, deeper meaning. When the metric itself becomes the goal, we inevitably lose sight of what truly matters. We are not ants. We can choose to look up from the path.